Well, happy day, everybody. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. January 4th. Happy birthday, Michonne Garrett, our daughter.
Happy birthday.
Today. Yeah, and boy, I hope you're having a better day today, Kevin McCarthy. But I'm quite sure you're not. And actually, I hope you just get so fed up you quit. And if you don't know what we're talking about, well, that's politics, which we like talking about a lot around here. We'll talk about it a lot, how we get the common good to be part of our lives in everything, as well as our politics. Why leave out politics when you ask for the common good? By the way, Dan, I was filling up my car at a gas station, and I have the vehicle that we have still has the Vote Common Good sticker on it, the one I was driving.
Oh yeah,
so it has the big Vote Common Good logo in the website, votecommongood.com. And when you drive a vehicle like this, a big black, Ford Expedition, and it's got a logo on it, it just invites people to talk to you. I mean, it really does. Or just generally think things about you. In fact, I leave the logo on there so it looks like a work vehicle as opposed to just a guy driving around in that giant thing, ruining the environment. And a guy came up and said, "Hey, I really like your sticker. Like, we need a whole lot more common good in our world. The more people need to think about it. And, we got to stop all this craziness that's going on." And I could tell by a few of the things he said, and just a general read, I may have misread him, but I don't think so, that he would be on the other side of many of the political issues that I would, and maybe even identify himself, in a anti-government sort of space.
Yeah.
But as is always the case, people see that phrase common good and vote common, they're like, yeah, that's absolutely what we need to do. And that means, and then their solution or their approach to that is completely opposite of, what I might be suggesting what we do at Vote Common Good, what we would suggest. So it still remains one of the great connecting points, right? You have this little moment of agreement that we should, care for the common good in all of our things, and even our politics. And from there, the conversation just gets started. So just a little reminder.
It really becomes a conversation of who is in the common good, who's included, who's not. So often that's where it starts. It's like, well, yeah, common good for United States citizens, but if you come here illegally, blah, 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 then it's like, oh, I guess we're starting from two different places where we talk about human beings.
Right.
And
totally. Yeah. Like, and it's not just U.S. citizens. It's, and we all do this, right? We end up with kind of a long adjective-driven subset, hardworking Americans. That seems to be a lot of people want to have in there. Like, there's somehow hard work is in there, but they don't really mean that, right? Because some people who work jobs that are not very rewarding, and so somebody works 30, 40, 50 hours a week and still needs some help. Well, they're not working hard enough, or they're not hard enough workers, or now they're working hard and not smart.
Yeah.
So we
if they work in fast food and are working 40 hours a week, but still can't pay rent because minimum wage is so low, well, that's on them.
Right. The business traveler who feels like, man, I'm really working hard and sacrificing a lot being on the road. And they are, they're doing their part. Doesn't tend to think that about the person that's then going to clean their room, that person's really working hard and sometimes needs a little bit of help. So, that's all going on. And then inside the political parties, boy, there is a range inside those parties, which is what we're seeing right now in trying to select a Speaker of the House, is that in the Republican Party, there's not just one kind of Republican. There's the insurrectionists supporting burn it all down, tear apart the institutions crowd. These are the 20 led by Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert and all those. They hate the Kevin McCarthy types, and they think they're all just, into it for, the swamp and all this. So they're fighting in their own world about how much institutionality should exist. Same thing happens in the Democratic Party, some less institutionalized and some more institutionalized people. So all of that is also happening, and you can't cut quite as easily between Republican and Democrat and have that tell you everything you need to know. Caveat that with, but the Republicans that aren't into the burn it all down and lie about everything and attack the institutions that exist, and as the MAGA Trumpist people do, have just stayed silent for so long and want to continue to run down that road. So that's another problem that they need to address. But today we're going to talk a little more philosophical and use a big metaphor for how we pursue the common good. Thinking about music of all things. Now, Dan, we should give our bona fides on music because you have many of them. I am a new guitar player who, in the last year, actually last 363 days.
Oh,
I'm like
you're
someone
almost
who's
to the 1 year mark. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to get a medallion or something from somebody. I don't know. I would think I'm going to hit the 1 year mark. I'm counting this thing like someone who's accomplishing recovery. So, I'm counting the days. January 6th will be the 1 year date that I started playing guitar and learning for the first time in my life. I started as a 55-year-old. For the first time in my life, anything about music, theory, understanding, notes. I listen to music, I know music, but I never played anything, had no understanding. So I've got all that. And in fact, I'm going to put up a video on Friday of sort of a 1 year reflection on all that, if anyone happens to still be interested. You, on the other hand, have been, and I would dare say are, a professional musician and professional quality musician. So you've got a whole other level of competency around all this.
Yeah, professional is a strong word, but I have made a living somewhat making music.
Traveled and had a band, and it was your job, and
yeah. For a bunch of years, I fronted a band, and we toured and signed a record contract, and almost had that rock and roll dream, and then the label fell apart, and it was a whole big dramatic disappointment. Real world, waking up to how things actually work. But yeah, I just can't quit music. It's something that I just love to do, and can't stop, won't stop.
Yeah, and you make music. Like, you, in your brain, conceive of sounds, rhythms, melodies, patterns, and then put those together, somehow remember them, which I still can't seem to figure out, a year into this, how people remember any of this stuff. Remember them and then can perform them later with musicianship on instruments and with your voice. So, I mean, that is a level. Okay, and the obvious here, lots of people do this, right? All over the place. There's music just constantly. But it's also a real fraction of the population that can do that. It is a remarkably rare skill that
it is fun that it still feels like doing a magic trick to a lot of people to be able to pull a song out of thin air and create it. So,
dude, seriously. And I was watching a video this morning, or maybe yesterday. I have different times of the day where I do certain things. I have this like discovery time where I'm supposed to learn stuff, note theory and all this. So I watch a lot of videos and instructional things. And this person's talking about, it's a whole video series on improvisation, right? So how do you learn to sort of play along and jam and improvise while other people are playing? That is just unbelievable to me. This isn't even complex jazz. This is just like pentatonic scale movements around, and a couple of E scale patterns, but that people they feel it, and they can't describe it while they're doing it. Their hands just move, and somehow their fingers are leading and the rest of them is following. I mean, there's a shift that happens that I think is so magical and so wonderful. And I'm nowhere near that, right? It's, if you think about like a language that people will learn, whether that's an adult or a child learning a second or third or more languages, or a human being learning their first spoken language, it's really slow. You think about a little toddler having a certain set of words and then starting sounding them out and, looking adorable because they, mispronounce one or use the wrong word here and there, and they're starting to put them together. It takes truly years of development,
Mm-hmm.
partly because the brain's development, but also just practicing that over and over until someone can put, like we're doing right now, language together and just string it together without even thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
We're not, in no way, shape, or form am I thinking about the words I'm about to say before I say them. They're happening simultaneously to whatever thought I have. And I'm not thinking about how the words thinking about are spelled. I'm not
Right.
Thinking.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the word, but they're all made up of letters and
Mm-hmm.
sounds. And so anyway, all of this to say, even if you're not musical, what we're going to talk about today, I think, is the same. It's a reflection on the reality of the human experience. And, Wednesdays, we like to talk about spirituality and faith as it relates to the common good. And music is this universal reality that we live in. Birds singing, heartbeats pounding, uh, chimes blowing in the wind. Like there's a musicality to the world that we're always matching or trying to replicate or trying to play. So I want to
Mm-hmm.
use a conversation about music as this way to think about a big operative metaphor. And I just want to say, like, I don't think metaphors are. I think metaphors are pretty much all we have when it comes to thinking in language. Like, there is no everything is a version of something else as you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily as you do it, right? Or so you pick up a pen, and that was actually an action of picking up a pen. So I have a pen in my hand. There's really one there. But when I think about that action, I'm doing something else. It's a part of consciousness, and human consciousness is always referential, and and when you're referencing something, you're using a series of comparisons, and
Mm-hmm.
metaphors are this functional way of comparing things. So for me, the difference between a metaphor and the real thing is very unimportant.
Mm.
Right? They're to the human experience. I'm not someone who believes, as maybe my Christian Scientist friends would, that everything that we're experiencing is all just an illusion and just a series of metaphor, and there is no actual there. Like
Mm-hmm.
philosophical terms. I'm a realist, so I think there is a thing there. But any experience a human being has with that thing, you're then using thought and consciousness and referential language to internal language or musical language or other kinds of language. So
Yeah.
I just want to sort of step away for a second and say metaphor to me is not. We're not like, oh, what if life was like music? No, what I'm trying to say is, no, I think you can use music as a way to actually allow your
Yeah.
human experience and consciousness to think about the other real things you do, because it's
Mm-hmm.
the tool that we use as human beings.
Yeah.
It's the framework.
And what I like about this metaphor is with music, the purpose of the rules of music is different than in a lot of things, like from
Mm.
science or from uh, theology even. The purpose of the rules of music, you learn the basics, you learn the scales, you learn the rules so that you can break them, so that you
Yeah.
can move beyond them. And I think that's really liberating for some people and
Mm-hmm.
really scary for other people. And it sort of depends on your temperament and personality. But I always struggled. I took music theory in school and
Mm-hmm.
classical guitar, where
Oh,
you have to sit in a very specific way. You have to hold your hands in a very specific way. You have to have one
yes.
foot up on a little stool. And
Yes.
I love
That's the stool
classical
right there.
guitarists and I love the music, but I just struggled. I wouldn't have the angle right, and my teacher would reprimand me. I'm like, I don't care about the angles, and I
Yeah.
just want
Yeah.
to play. I want to make the notes come out. And the
Well,
goal of the rules is to help you get to a place
yeah.
where you can just stop thinking about those things and not worry about the rules, because the rules are there to set you up for success rather than hold you in.
100% agree. And I would even go so far as to say um, uh, the other areas of life. What's what I'm thinking of? The other sectors of life, theology, like you mentioned, or science, or computer coding, or any of the things that we tend to think, well, now there you really do want the rules, you want to obey them. People that work in those areas, they say the same thing that
Yeah.
musicians, artists say. They're like, oh no, hang on a minute. Like, in our world, we have the fundamentalists who stick to this only the known way of being. But the where advancement comes in our field is somebody who sees it differently, breaks the rules, tries something new. That's why it's a great metaphor for life, because it's not just about music. It's really about, it's a clue into how life really does work and function. And I have this guitar teacher, and I'm constantly peppering him with like, so why is it like this? I can't think of a particular example now, but in our lessons, 28 of 30 minutes might be involved in some sort of response and question answer, because I'm trying to understand the language set and the framework. I like that kind of thing. And he's constantly saying, oh, this is, and he's Berklee School of Music trained, right? But he's like, this is just we had a starting point for this style of music that we're talking about. We're talking about Western music right now, and that's really different than Indian music, and that's really different than Asian music, and they have a different scale. But it takes a piece of it, and he just starts to describe a big narrative, a big world of relationality and interconnectedness, and how this piece makes sense because it chooses to operate inside of this system. And so in that system, then you're comparing things, and you're allowing music and notes and rhythms and harmonies to play with each other. So we start with like, well, why is it do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do? Why that? Well, it's philosophy and, kind of very, very simple music theory. But the 12-year-old question, or the 8-year-old's question about, well, why this? And where did that come from? It all leads back to the same, well, there's not really a good answer for why that is.
Made that up. Yeah.
Yeah. It just is. And once you sort of embrace that non-demand, right, that it didn't have to be that way. But if you start there, then it just opens up all this other way of being, and there's a commonality. So another music student walked into the lesson that I had on Tuesday, and Tim continued. He's my instructor. He continued our conversation and said to this other person who's much more advanced, he said, "Hey, Kevin, say something about the, I don't know, chords." I've kind of lost the specifics on it because it's all new language to me, right? Start telling about how these work together. And he talked a little bit about the relationship between chords and minors and majors. And he said, telling his own story, he said, I was in England, and there were some people from, there was a person who played and spoke Spanish, another person who was Italian, and we were all together. And when we brought our guitars out, we started speaking this similar language of music, right? They could watch what I was doing and then say, I got it. And then they would start to follow, and then they would lead. So this spoken language had, unfamiliarity, but then this musical relationship, they started to see and understand and hear each other, and could play along. And that's the thing about music, is we choose in English to use the word play. And that's the right word, right? And there's some other things we say play, like you go and play tennis, or some sports we say you play, but other sports we say, or activities we say you practice. So my wife is a yoga instructor. Yoga instructors don't call going to a yoga class, I played yoga.
Oh, they don't play yoga.
They don't play yoga.
It seems like one of the more fun ones to play.
Totally. But what do you do in yoga? You practice yoga. right? So it's a practice, not something that you play. Anyway, so I think a lot of this like borrowed language
Mm-hmm.
is really insightful, right? What does someone do with their spirituality? What does someone do with their common goodery? Do they practice? Are they a practicing Jew? Are they a practicing Muslim? Are they a practicing Christian? Or do they play Christianity? Do they play Judaism? Do they play Islam? Do they play the open-hearted spirituality?
Mm-hmm.
Like just that little shift from practice to play. And I'm not picking on yoga or practices or something, but it's a different space. So
Mm-hmm.
when I come downstairs, where I do a lot of my music stuff because it harasses Shelly, who I live with, I have to say to myself, I choose to say to myself, I'm not going to practice. I'm going to go play.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I was an athlete, and I remember the difference between games where we'd play a game or go to practice. And something about, I guess, skill development is like learning and developing skill. But the purpose of it, the reason you would have rules or practice or hold your hand in a certain way in basketball, or hold your hand a certain way in guitar, or
Mm-hmm.
hold your voice or draw from your diaphragm if you're a singer, is so that you can access that in order to play in more spaces and more ways. In other words, to actually do the very musical thing.
Yeah. It is interesting too that the sports metaphor is that you work really hard so that you can play.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
it makes sense for a lot of things. Like you want to get better at your game because it's more fun to not suck.
Yes.
So when you're playing, you're having more fun. But yeah, we don't often use sports as the analogy for spirituality. I find that
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Or we do, or with the parts of sport that we pick, things like discipline or goal setting or any of the
Yeah. Yeah.
rest of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really something. All right, so let's talk a little bit about music. One of the things when I first started playing a year ago, um, I remember I have a series of texts. I think, Dan, you might be on them. I messaged people and said, "How do you make the A chord?"
Yep.
Right. So I was beginning learning. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
I was beginning learning guitar, and the online instructor that I was using was like, "You're going to learn to play a song with the E chord, the A chord, and the D chord, E, A, D." Lots of reasons why they pick those, but anyway, they're fairly simple
Mm-hmm.
chords. And then they immediately start saying, and there's different ways you can do the A chord. You can do it with your three fingers like this, on the same strings, or you can do your fingers like this, or you can do a bar chord and you can do your fingers like this. So that felt important to me to be like, all
Like,
right,
wait a
which
second.
one?
Step one already
Right.
has these
Yeah.
variables.
Step one is all of a sudden people like, well, it depends. Right.
Yep. That was kind
And
of the answer from everyone in that guitar
every one
thread.
of
It's
you
like,
freaking little, wannabe
well,
philosophers are like, well,
what's
little
the situation?
grasshopper, it depends on which thing I'm doing. And so now I understand that, right? That the rule is useful. Rule being put your fingers like this is useful in a certain context. Maybe what
Mm-hmm.
chord you're coming from or what chord you're going to. And that's true just sort of across the scale, literally and metaphorically. But this idea that the point of the fingers in a position on the strings is to make a sound, right? It's outcome related, and the outcome is the sound, but the sound is really the experience, and the experience is really the feeling that comes with that with that sound. So it's this connected practice or activity where you put your fingers toward getting to a particular experience,
Yeah.
sound, feeling. I remember moving between the A chord and the A minor chord and the E chord and the E minor chord. And for whatever construct I have, I guess, of just Western music, those minor chords all sound sad.
Yeah.
That was my first musical experience, was playing an A and then an A minor and being like, I literally feel something different when I
Yep.
move this one finger from here to there. And it sounds right. They sound well together. They sound similar, but one is sad.
Yeah.
One is less sad. And like that was the key, right? To me was, okay, that's what we're doing. So how do you put your fingers? Well, it depends on which sound you're coming from and going to. And this relationality starts to show up like week one, literally week
Mm-hmm.
one, and this is what I think makes music beautiful and lovely and creative and human, and also really hard, because you all of a sudden you're into a relational system, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not just learning a series of things. It's not just a series of keystrokes or a series of put your finger here and do this thing. It's the relationship of this position to this next position, so that there's a relationship between that sound and this other sound, and what that sound is actually going to produce.
Yeah.
And I find it just so insightful to the human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think about all the stuff we deal with and all the things we talk about and the way people behave. And I'm super into just behavioral patterns and how people live in certain ways. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe coming from, follow my metaphor, maybe coming from, a D minor chord, they're going to play the A with these fingers or just with one finger,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you think, well, how can somebody do that? Well, you can, and the point is is the outcome the thing that you wanted? Did it
Yeah.
get you to where you're going? And it's so easy to find ourselves trapped in just what we do or what someone else does,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, I don't know, I guess the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of, it reminds me of the story where Jesus gets caught healing someone on the Sabbath or
Mm-hmm.
something, and the religious leaders are very upset because he has broken the rule about working
Yeah.
on the Sabbath. And he says, look, the Sabbath, we weren't made to please the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made to help us. And I think
Yes.
that's the same with rules in music. Like, these rules exist just as scaffolding so that we can climb
Yep.
higher, not to hold us in.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So, and that perspective, right? Like, what's the effect? What's the outcome?
Mm-hmm.
Is such an important part, I think, of this
Yeah, what's the
way of thinking
point?
about,
Like,
what's the
what are we
point?
trying to do here?
Yeah, yeah. What are you doing? And somehow kind of keeping that in mind, and then seeing, so for music, at least in the stringed instrument, that I'm playing, I think piano's similar, but maybe a little different. A lot of people know piano theory on this more than guitar theory. You're having to suspend a lot of assumptions, because even though there are rules, it's more like the English language, where those rules are really built in with a lot of exceptions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of, well, it depends,
Yeah.
like
I
we were
after
talking
E,
earlier.
except after
Except
C.
after
And
C.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I try to tell people, because my last name is spelled with a G, a vowel, which is an I, and then two T's. And people often want to spell it with two G's and then any number of T's. And I have to say to them, no, see, in English, the G has the soft G sound, as in G, versus the hard G sound, as in G, depending on how many G's there are before a vowel. So two G's is but before and after a vowel. So 2Gs has a gus sound, like in the word maggot.
Mm-hmm.
1G has a soft G sound, like in the word magic. So my last name is Pagitt, so it has a just sound to it, the soft G sound. So there's only 1G. Trying to get family and friends to be able to spell Pagitt correct. I mean, it's 1G or 2, and the number of people who put 2Gs because they don't know the rule.
Well,
don't know the
because the English language
rule.
is just
Because
a
it's not.
disaster. We should just spell it with a J. If it makes a J sound, how about that?
Totally. And I bet the Danes would spell it exactly that way. Pajitt. And then people would just be like, there
oh,
it is,
yeah.
Pagitt. Yeah. But that's the thing about English language. That's the thing about music. That's the thing about human beings,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you see someone in some freeze frame moment, or you stop someone on a piano in one freeze frame moment, you don't have any idea what sound they're making, where they're coming, where they're going, or even, and this is the thing about music that's just hilarious to me, even what you would call the note they're playing. So you can help me on this. The sharps and flats are something that I'm just beginning to sort of understand. And I don't know if I have this right or not, but is it the A sharp and the B flat that are the same note, just depending on if you're coming from the A or coming from the B?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, if you're walking up and you want to make your A 1/2 step higher, that becomes a sharp. If you're coming down from a B, it's a B flat, but on a piano, that's the same note. Same note.
It's the same note. It's the same note on a guitar. It's
Yeah.
the same note. And so if you say to someone, play a B flat or play an A sharp, it's the same one. You're like, how can it be the same one? Well, it's because it's that note in relationship to the note previous to it.
Mm-hmm.
So these names and titles are descriptors of a relationship.
Yeah.
And this is the fundamental thing that I think Common Good calls us to, is that relationality, the it depends part of all this. This is just the truth of music, is that sound that you hear. So if you play the A sharp or the B flat and someone says, what note is that? Well, it depends. Both people can be right,
yeah,
right?
what key are we playing in?
Yes, what key are we playing in, and where are you coming from? And when people say, like, what key are you playing in? Because this has been a whole awakening the last couple of months for me. I'm like, well, what difference would it make about what key I'm in? They're like, well, that's the only way you would know what group of notes and letters you're dealing with. And just having to sort of swim in the world of everything is in relationship to something else.
Yeah.
That opening up of music, and if people would see music that way and sort of talk about it that way, I think it matches the human impulse, because this is what we have going on. Now, how does this relate to things like truth and all the rest of it? It's really interesting. Philosophers around the area of truth, and I've spent a lot of my adult life thinking about this stuff in relationship to spirituality and just truthiness in and of itself, and absolutisms. I think that absolutist tendencies and fundamentalist tendencies, which tend to go together, don't serve humanity very well. They're quite inaccurate. People believe and talk about them at times, if they're advocates of it, as if they're the most accurate. Like, like this phrase, it comes up a lot in language. What exactly do you mean? Okay, that's like me writing to all of you and say, exactly how do you put your fingers? You're like, well, it depends. What exactly do you mean? Well, it depends, on how I'm using this word in the context, or using this idea in a context of something else. So exacting language and specificity and all that, it exists, it's around, and it's incredibly unuseful for a lot of things, or a lot of the things that matter. And I've actually been really surprised to watch how conservatives, political, social conservatives, have been moving so aggressively into the like non absolute kinds of spaces, like truth doesn't really matter. You can just say whatever. Like, hey, if you just tell people your mom was, killed in the attacks of 9/11, that's kind of fine, because all you're really doing is trying to get somebody to, like have a response to your idea, this congressman
Yeah.
that was lying about this, or the myriad lies that Trump kicks out in the world, and all this. Like, oh, no. Think about what he means, not what he says. And okay, so you watch that whole thing sort of happen. It's like, all right, here we
Yeah.
go. They start sounding like all the woke philosophers that they, spoke out against, right? When
Yeah.
I remember when Christianity and these fundamentalists were always talking about absolutes and fundamentals and absolute truth, and
Oh,
things
yeah.
either are or not. They're ons and offs. They're not dimmer switches.
I
Just
grew
all
up
the
being
things.
so concerned about finding absolute truth. Was it possible? How do you find it? How do you know if you've found it? What if it's
Totally.
spent so much time and worry like thinking
Yes.
about that stuff? And that turns out doesn't even matter to them.
Nope. Never was the point. Never even was the point. Yeah, and the will of God, and
Oh,
like, is the
wow,
will
yeah.
of God a spot? Is the will of God an idea? Like, that's just a thing. And I think it's a developmental piece. And the things we learn from music, I think, help us to see all of this and
Mhm.
say, like, okay, that's look, there are notes, there are chords, there
Mhm.
are rhythms. I promise you there's a rhythm, because I can't find it. I can't stay on the 1/4. The only way it's obvious that I can't stay on the 1/4 is that there's a 1/4 beat. Like, and I'm nowhere near it. I mean, I'm on it occasionally, just, like a leap year happens every once in a
Like
while,
a
just to get the
broken
calendar back up.
clock. Just
Yeah, it's got to be right every once in a while. So those things exist.
Mhm.
Yes. M- But even a rhythm is only meaningful if that's the outcome you want, right?
Mhm.
If that's, and this is the thing you were talking about earlier, these rules, whatever they are, exist in service of the beauty, the outcome, the
Yeah.
feeling, and I heard all these guitar teachers, and they're saying it all the time. They're like, look, just settle in and let the response and reaction come, because it's the feeling that music exists in the parts of the human experience that we tend to call feelings.
Mhm.
Like
It's
how
intuitive, yeah.
how are you interacting with all of
Mhm.
this? And you have this little quote about fundamentalism
Yeah, I want
in
to get
art
into
and music.
this.
That's
This is from a book that I really love, and I read through it, a couple times a year typically. It's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
hmm,
And he has this quote about fundamentalism in art. He says, "The fundamentalist, or more accurately, the beleaguered individual who comes to embrace fundamentalism,"
hmm.
love that. Pressfield writes, "cannot stand freedom. He cannot find his way into the future, so he retreats to the past. Fundamentalism and art are mutually exclusive. There's no such thing as fundamentalist art. This does not mean the fundamentalist is not creative. Rather, his creativity is inverted. He creates destruction. Even the structures he builds, his schools and networks of organization, are dedicated to annihilation of his enemies and of himself." What a
Wow, wow, wow,
And
wow.
then this last little bit, while one looks forward, is talking about the difference between fundamentalists and humanists, is what he's talking about in this book. While one looks forward, hoping to create a better world, the other looks backward, seeking to return to a purer world
Wow.
from which he and all have fallen. I think that last quote is really accurate. Like, there's so many people
Totally.
that are just like, if we could just get back to the good old days.
Yes.
And there's so little thought going into what could we create in the future. Just really, really
That is
striking.
wonderful. And the thing about it is that all that fundamentalism, and it doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't really matter the topic, is almost always, I'll go so far as to say always, and then someone can just correct it if there's an exception, is always the system created to describe something that existed without the fundamentalist description existing, right? So the rules of whatever it is didn't exist first, and then people created. Someone made something. They made words, they made art, they made a building, and then someone else looked at it and started to understand it, started to deconstruct it and look and see how was that put together.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, they said, oh, here's how we're going to describe that. And that description then became the thing that became instructive for other people to say, here's how you too can make that.
Yeah.
And soon that description then becomes something that can't be changed.
Yep.
But it wasn't necessary at the start. And you can just find this in every industry. I know this very well in the Christian narrative. You know, people often want, if they're going to be fundamentalists in Christian spirituality, they really want the Bible to be that thing that serves as the fundamentalist touchstone, the thing at which you compare everything. But there was a whole generations, decades, centuries of Christianity before there was a Bible, right? Like literally the New Testament was being written while people were being Christian, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously they didn't need it to be it, right? It is describing the thing that happened. So therefore it can't be mandatory and necessary because something exists. So what good is it? Well, it can be a lot of good. It can be useful. It can be profitable. It can be helpful. All the things, that Scripture describes itself as being inside the Jewish and Christian texts. But it's not necessary. And this is the thing that you see in music, right? You're like, well, who did Mozart study to be able to write the things Mozart made? No one. Right? Like Mozart wasn't like studying pre-Mozart. Mm-hmm. Bach the same way. Like these were people creating things. And the same thing is going on now. Someone is sitting in her basement. She's got an electric guitar in her hand, or she's got a fiddle, or she's got some kind of tricked out, changed up keyboard, and she's making something. And some point, 30, 50, 100, 500 years, someone may hear that and be like, okay, here's what she was doing. Mm-hmm. And they'll start describing it, and they can put all kinds of words around it, and they can put all kinds of understanding around it, because she is actually doing something that can be described. Mm-hmm. But she's not doing it from some formula. Yeah. She's making it. It's maker culture. Mm-hmm. And man, that is the thing that we're all compelled to do, right? Is to make it to life and goodness and common good and beauty and spirituality and politics and relationships. Like you literally are making them up. And then you can but you're never operating in a vacuum. So you're always comparing them to something, and you're finding them in some context and some relationality. But it's a fundamentally different project to say, oh, what I've now done is created something that didn't exist using whatever set of skills I previously had, and the new ones that I developed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good.
I was watching a video. There's a guy, Rick Beto. He's one of these guitar guys, and he has this. I'm trying to learn a particular Gordon Lightfoot song called "If You Could Read My Mind," which I think is one of the great songs ever.
Didn't go for Edmund Fitzgerald, huh?
That would be very on point for a Minnesotan, right? To sing a song about a boat accident on Lake Superior. No, I didn't. There's a lot. I don't think Edmund Fitzgerald is anywhere near the best song by Gordon Lightfoot. Maybe it is, but I think there's a number of better ones. And I think If You Could Read My Mind is just something else. And I've thought this for a very, very long time before I ever knew music or was playing music or something. I was just always wondering, like, Gordon, what's eating at you, man? Like, what made you make this song? Because whatever's going on in there, it's just a great thing. Okay, so this, I think Rick Beto has a series of YouTube videos, and they're under the banner of what makes this song so great, right? So he deconstructs a song, like the quote, right? He goes in and deconstructs it and says, here's what's happening in this song. Here's these notes, and here they're moving, he starts using this complex language, right? He's moving from one chord to another and moving to this sus, and then he's got a 7 flat. And he's kind of pausing the song as it goes, and he's describing it in music theory. And he's a music producer. And he's playing some of it on a guitar, and he's got a little, a piano there that's like a synthesizer that's playing some strings. And he's like, and then the strings come. So he's showing you what's happening and then playing it, and you can start to see it and like, oh, that's what's happening. And why do I feel this way at that point in the song? Well, here's the swell, and here's how it's coming together, and here's how the chords are relating to each other, right? So he's describing it. Now, my guess is that when Gordon Lightfoot was writing that song in 1971 on his guitar, and then someone put an arrangement with it for the recording with some strings, they weren't doing what Rick Beto is doing with the song, right? Yeah. They weren't sitting down and saying, okay, so here's the formula. Now, what you can do afterward is deconstruct it. So he built it, then they didn't demolish it. They deconstructed it. They took it apart and said, here's how it got put together. Here's what's happening. And then that has some names to it, because they just have a way to describe in music, everything that happens. You could say, well, that was a mistake. And a lot of musicians will say this. They're like, oh, that song I wrote and that chord people love, it was actually a mistake. And then I kind of liked it. I liked the way it sounded. So then it gets a name, and because it is a thing, is some relationship between notes gets a name. That experience of watching a song be explained in a way that honors the song, it's not dishonoring it. It's not trying to demolish it at all. It's trying to say, here's what's going on that's so great. So if you want to make a song that does this, here's a thing to pay attention to. Like, just know what's doing that to the human ear and to the human experience.
I think, unless you got some more on that.
No.
What's interesting about that too is oftentimes the person that can do that work of deconstructing and naming the different parts of the process and the different chords and keys and stuff like that, they're often not the ones that can create something with as much meaning. And it's even the case that like someone that's more technically proficient at guitar might be able to play better. Like I remember hearing about, like Jimi Hendrix is, one of the world's most famous guitarists, right? But there's a lot of guitarists who are technically more proficient than Jimi Hendrix. He was, kind of a wild, sloppy player and can't do the intricate things that a lot of modern players can do. But he can play that guitar in such a way that evokes emotions that some shredder in a Guitar Center can't replicate and can't create. They can only imitate,
Yes.
I just find that really, really fascinating as well, that you can know the rules, you can know the scales, you can dissect and try to replicate something in kind of a sterile environment.
Yep.
But that's almost the wrong direction to come at art and music from. Like, it almost always still has to start with the emotion, and then you use those building blocks, but not the other way around.
Boy, that is so well said. And that's the dilemma for a lot of people, right? And I'm one of these. I am clearly never ever going to be a musical creator. Like I just know that I don't have the internal ear sound. If I make anything that is unique and someone says, wow, I experienced something out of that will simply be an accident. There's just no, okay,
Well, a
that's not
lot
going to
of
happen.
art is an accident. So.
Yeah. Okay. So fair enough. It's going to happen once and not be repeated. And I'm not saying the muse may show up and visit me and I'll accept that as a gift. I just mean
Yeah.
Okay. And I can learn to play music. Like I can find a way to be an imitator that has real resonance and meaning and tonality. And so I'll say it, I'll have my own tone, but likely around sounds that other people have constructed. Just knowing my ear and ability and, so on. And the number of years I have left on this planet, even if things go really great, I'm just not going to get there. So I have to figure out how do I learn to play and to make that's not just imitation. Right. So when I'm learning a song, and this is what I think is true about spirituality and everything. I wrote a whole book about this book called Outdoing Jesus, which is kind of on this, right? That we're supposed to see Jesus in Christian spirituality as the master teacher for whom we don't imitate, but whom we try to do our own version of the very things that Jesus called us to do. It's called Outdoing Jesus, right?
Like this with music. It's like, how can you find yourself in a song that's already been written? How can you make that into a playpen that you can explore rather than, a prison that you feel bad if you don't get every single note like they did on the recording.
Yeah. And even if I end up making up a song, which I'm sure I will, I'll make up a song. It is not, it's nowhere near invention level, right? Like I'm in some kind of a improvisation thing of a lot of other stuff that existed. Some people, though, their level of creativity is going to be to make something wholly new. So somehow, and this is true of our spirituality, and this is what I think a lot of people struggle with, because a lot of people that I know who are deconstructing their faith, and I'm all for people, I have no opinion about whether you do or don't, and you stay or go. I don't care. I mean, I care about you, but I have no preference one way or the other, right? I'm like the server at the restaurant that when they come up and say, "Hey, are you done eating?" They really don't need you to explain to them why you didn't finish your food. Like, "Oh, I had a big breakfast, but this was really good." Like care. I'm like that. Like, I don't care. You can take it or leave it. If it doesn't serve you anymore, isn't good for you, don't. But don't be flippant about it is what I would suggest if you're in the middle of some kind of deconstruction, really, frankly, of any variety. And a lot of people struggle with how do they live in some authentic way when all they know are the chords and the finger shapes and the sounds that they've heard before. And they say to themselves, I can't create my own spirituality. So they hunt around like me on the internet every day, finding guitar teachers and songs and soloists and instructions and pentatonic scales and things. And I'm just trying to glean, because if I just sit down with a guitar, I don't have proficiency, I don't have skills, I don't have repetitive abilities, that I can just put into place. I can't get my fingers in the same places every single time. Like, I'm really at a rudimentary level, even a year in. But can I play? Right? Can I see it as actually playing this thing? Can I sing along to songs, even though I'm not creating, like, all of that? And that's the thing I hope for a lot of people, is that they can find some spirituality and some common goodery that is going to really compel them to the kinds of feelings that you have about music, that you have about life. And really, if you're pursuing the common good for something other than goodness and beauty and joy and betterment for all people, right? Where we all do better when we all do better, or the way a friend of mine puts it, where we all have enough and no one needs to be afraid. I think that's a pretty good goal to get to, all the rest of this stuff, all the machinations, all the fights, all the fear that we have of other people or of other people having power, it just can and should really go away if we can approach it in a much more, sort of music theory way. And it's funny because I find music theory to be one of the most exciting parts of all this stuff. I love that. I love to sit around and listen to things and read things and learn scales. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. And I understand that other people are like, I don't want any of that. I just want to, where do I put my fingers to make that sound? And then if I put my fingers here and make that sound, I don't care about the relationship between those two sounds and what you call it. And I'm like, oh, totally get that. I don't think anybody has to, love to honor or sort of sit in awe of like, and then there's a word for it. Unbelievable. Human beings are incredible. Look what we do. We can even come up with words for this stuff.
Yeah.
It really is quite something.
It is. And I think you mentioned that a lot of times these structures that get turned into fundamentalism are often just the ways we describe things initially. And I think that's true in the deconstruction side of things as well, because I remember, starting to deconstruct my faith kind of early college years and having these intuitions. I'd been taught all the rules, all the scales of Christianity, told that I have to play within this key. But I had these intuitions that, no, there's something bigger or different out there.
Yeah.
And then I was given language for that.
Nice.
From people like Rob Bell or Brian McLaren. And it's like you discovering music theory language. It's like, oh, of course there's people that have been speaking this the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the wonder of deconstruction. And I think it's such a great word. And I liked it in that fundamentalist quote that you put up. And because it's different than demolish. And a lot of people think that the opposite of construction is deconstruction. The opposite of construction is demolition, right?
Yeah.
So when you blow up a building or knock one down with a wrecking ball, you're not deconstructing the building, you're demolishing the building. Different projects.
Yeah.
Deconstruction is someone who says, oh, this is how the thing, idea, concept, building was put together. It's explaining how it was constructed. How did we get here? And the reason that matters is there's some points in the construction of nearly everything. The construction of of an mRNA vaccine, the construction of a thought, the construction of a building, the construction of a computer, the construction of a cord. Anything that we make is made with a series of actions or products or something, like something's there. And once you see, oh, that's how those two things came together. Well, what if they went together like this? It gives you then the freedom to say, oh, that thing they did actually wasn't necessary. You didn't need that. Now, it really helps. So your great illustration, which comes from a famous Jesus one of the Sabbath, was one of those. In Judaism, Sabbath was super important. Really meaningful. Like it's the only one of the things in the Jewish text, in the Jewish story, that God also participates in, right? Like God rested on the seventh day. And so that's the reason we call it holy, right? This kind of thing. So then Jesus comes along and says, yeah. Look, I mean, super important, but important because it benefits humanity.
Right.
Not important because we have to be serving it. And this is what I think the most helpful deconstruction can do for people, is when they realize, oh, these things I didn't need at all. It turns out they're not necessary for me. They're not helpful. They're not beneficial. They're not something but this other piece I do actually want. That's the purpose of deconstruction of anything. And again, it can really be a thought or a set of relationships or something. not just destroying it, not just getting rid of
Yeah.
it. And I watch a lot of people in their spirituality be confused between demolition and deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
Like ultimately being like, oh, I'm just done with it. I'm just over it. And you're like, yeah, it's really, it seems like that's serving you really well. How did it get to the place where it like how did it get there? Oh, I have no idea. Just like, hey, I bought this property. It had this house on it. I'm tearing the house down. I'm going to put another house up on it, right? And you say to them, "Oh yeah, I wonder who built the house or why they built it this way."
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have no idea. I don't care. I just want it gone. Totally valuable project.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing you can do. Might not be the only thing you want to do, right? There might be, you might look in there and say like, hey, there's a hutch that's kind of built in and that thing's actually pretty cool. And here's how it functioned. Or, hey, look what they did when they had a well in this house. And that well was something that served in this way. Now we don't need well because we have city water, but we can reuse that room. We can remake that because now it's no longer necessary. Like there's just a lot of other things you can do other than demolition.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is most people want to move from one thing to another. They don't actually want to go through the process of deconstruction. And that's one of the things that happens in music too, is that I can watch people. I get a lot of advice because I say things on the internet about playing guitar, and I just hear people say to me like, oh, don't do finger exercises. Don't get caught up in scales. Don't worry about bar chords. Learn 4 chords and work on your hand rhythm and you'll be able to play a bunch of songs. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I don't want to do? Just play a bunch of songs. Like this is the whole thing. It's like, no, what I want to do is figure out how do people make songs,
Yeah.
right? Like not because I'm going to make something unique and great at all. That's totally not the project, but because I want to join in that community of people who make that stuff and not just imitate it, you know? And I don't know. And I see a lot of this in lots of spirituality and politics, in the same way. Like there's a lot of people when they think about politics, they just simply want to vote these bums out and vote those bums in, fair enough. Okay. That's all, but not really thinking about, okay, how do we make sure this benefits humanity and is good and isn't just a toxic waste of power distribution one over the other? It kind of reminds me of, do you watch those movies, the Christopher Guest movies, like Waiting for Guffman and those? Well, Waiting for Guffman, there's this great scene where Eugene Levy, they do this, it's a mockumentary, so he's being interviewed and he's looking straight at the camera and he says, people often ask me, hey, people often say to me, you must have been the class clown. And I say to him, no, I wasn't the class clown, but I sat behind the class clown and I studied him. And right, like somehow the way you get funny is by studying funny people. And so I carry both. I carry this reality of like, okay, all I'm ever going to be is someone who pretty much plays with what exists. But I don't have to be an imitator. It can be legitimate. I can, you can actually, yes, you can learn to be funny, but that's different than, just studying the class clown. And
for sure.
So that's what I got. What else? What else do you have?
I think that's great. I mean, I could go on and on about music and philosophy and spirituality, but.
And boy, I'll tell you, I wish there was more spaces where those came together, because especially in Christian spirituality, the connection between music and Christian spirituality is just hardwired. Like there's almost no ability to separate those. And one of the things I think that progressives have done poorly in Christian spirituality is we have not adopted music technology to carry the message.
Yeah. We could spend a whole show talking about how progressive Christian music is almost always of worse quality somehow.
Yes. And is almost always backward looking, right?
Yeah.
Like like you brought up, right? Like it starts with there's some period of time, usually a classical. So just my experience has been you go into most progressive, theologically progressive spaces and churches and communities, and they're going to be using music that's really old.
Yeah,
Right?
1700s.
Yeah.
Like,
Like when the theology of those periods was even more harmful than the theologies that are being perpetrated on people now
yeah.
from that concern, like really something.
Well, and that's a whole nother show of like progressive fundamentalism, how people think they have arrived at
Oh
this
yeah,
new
we
vantage
should be jotting.
point.
We should be jotting these
Yeah.
down. Uh,
Because
uh,
then they get stuck in this new progressivism.
yeah. So, and it's not just like what music do progressive churches use. That's a real thing, and I've been part of some projects where people have been trying to make some good music, and there's some that exist in the world. But it's the relationship to the music, right? Um, Martin Luther, big reformer in Christianity, the Calvinist gaggle, the Methodists with the Wesley with the Wesley brothers, the charismatic Pentecostal expressions, just to pick four of sort of the last 500 years that have had major impact, were all basically delivered through music. There is no Methodism, there is no charismatic Pentecostalism outside of the music. It just doesn't exist. It only it is a musical spirituality that then has all the rest of this stuff wrapped around it.
Yeah.
And that's different than what songs are you playing? An important question, but different, really, really quite different. And so I think that's another project of conversation, and political movements too. Common good political movements that don't have music aren't going to last. Well, they're not going to last. They're not going to exist. They won't come into being, and for if they do come into being, they'll go away because you can't sing them. And if you can't sing it, you don't believe it. And I just think that is fundamentally true. And whether singing is lyrics or singing is humming or singing is, the body's not making the music.
Yeah. Well, I think
nothing.
There's also a reaction against the manipulative power of worship music. And so a lot of progressive churches are like, well, we don't want to get close to that, so we're going to sing some really boring songs to make 100%. Sure that you can't be emotionally manipulated.
Yeah, we should do an entire conversation about this shared space of people recognizing that music has all the power. I was just trying to suggest, and then saying, so therefore we don't want any of that, because the only thing we want is you as an independent actor, like moving back to Descartesian sort of period, like you as a solo thinking human being that will make all choices unto yourself with no obligation to anyone, and certainly no pressure applied. Like that tendency, and I'm being real preachy about a very subset of progressive Christian spirituality, just removes everything that people then like about life. There's just nothing left. It's like, just pick a thing in the world that people do, and somewhere in there, there's a set of elements that tap into the human impulse of a person, and that's what people want. That's what they love. That's what they go there for. I mean, that's why the World Wrestling Federation or World Wrestling Entertainment exists. Not because people are knuckleheads and think it's real. That's not the point. It's the feeling they have when they're there. That's why there's sports. That's why $6 million has been given to a toy donation foundation from a football player that, was hit playing football and had a heart condition. $6 million has been raised by that thing now. Wow. But that $6 million is because people are like, oh no, that thing matters. Well, why does football matter? Because it does all those things that make somebody get caught up in something. And then you get into progressive Christian spirituality, and people are like, hey, the first thing we want to do is make sure nobody gets caught up in anything.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
let's
so we're
suck
done now?
all the fun out of it just to make
just
sure.
Suck all the life out of it and have no one look like a charismatic leader, have no one look like they're following anyone, and just and look, there's dangers to charismatic leaders 1,000 times over. Yes, so you do need to avoid those, but we can deconstruct all that stuff and not demolish it or ignore it or all the rest. That's actually a pretty good, I think, a pretty good topic for us to.
That'd be fun to dig into more.
Yeah.
But we should probably call it a day.
Yeah, that's enough.
Call it a Wednesday.
That's enough. Yeah.
Thanks to everyone in the chat for hanging with us. Kev, Joe, Jim, Susan, Tammy, Jennifer, Anthony, Alex. Thanks everybody.
Look at Mike D's quote though. He's got a quote here from Keanu Reeves. I dream of a day where I walk down the street and hear people talking about morality, sustainability, and philosophy instead of the Kardashians. Totally. Okay, I know we got to go. But why do people get into the Kardashians? Because they make you feel a way. Because there's a thing there, right? And yes, it's very base and it's very ridiculous and it's just, you got to be kidding me. And but there's people aren't. Well, this will be our other conversation. If you think people are basically fools, and I'm not saying Mike's saying this, but if your belief is that people are fools and therefore easily fooled and are being dragged down by a bunch of charlatans, then you're going to view the world in one way. If you view the world as there's a wisdom in the crowds and what we see by mass actions and activities tells us a reality of the world that we don't see in individual experiences, then you pay attention to pop culture because pop culture teaches you something. And again, the progressives tend to be strangely on a side of like, you're not depraved, you're just depraved or something. I don't know what it, it's like a version of depravity that you have an inability to not be schnookered. So yeah, that's what everybody's into. And therefore, so this is the dilemma, right? Mm-hmm. Why do human beings like some of the things that we do? And I just think there's a fundamental truth in there that we should be pursuing all that. But that's it. I'm jotting this down on
paying
a yellow.
Attention to and deconstructing.
And deconstructing and playing along to. So I thought I'd just play out today, everybody. I thought I just happen to have a guitar right here. No, I am not at a point yet where I will I'll put up a video or two of playing, but that's very, very well curated just because I don't want to be, I'm just not in a place yet where, I want that in my head. So it's still a very private experience in my, the way I access all of this, big community of musicians. Yep.
All right.
Okay, y'all. We'll see you tomorrow. We're going to be talking with our astrophysicist, pastor, and professor friend Paul Wallace tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow morning, like 8:30 Central or something like that. I can't remember what time we're doing Thursdays. All right.